tell you the truth.
The database started as a project for the first 100 days. It was in part an effort to not let us get distracted by the easily checked false or misleading things the president said, and we could keep our focus on writing substantive fact checks about big issues. And we could just say, oh, well, that thing the president said, we'll just put that in the database. We don't have to do a fact check on it. And then when we were done, readers begged us to keep it going. We kept it going for a year. And at that point, he did 2,000. It seemed manageable. So we said, we'll keep it going for the whole 4 years. And then it kind of ate up our lives because he kept saying more and more false things. The president's lying got worse and worse the longer he was president. So in his first year as president, he made on average about 6 false or misleading claims a day. The second year, it was 16 claims. The third year, it was 22 claims. And then the last year, the fourth year, which of course was a pretty dramatic year, his averaged 39 claims a day. Now, 39 claims a day is a lot. It's kind of amazing. And we recorded one day in November, the day before the election, he made more than 500 false or misleading claims.
Oh, they said, how is he going to do in Pennsylvania? He's going to win Pennsylvania except for the cheating. We figure we have to leave 5% for the cheating.
I mean, I think one reason why it just exploded so much at the end there is that he never really discarded a false claim. There were a few instances, but very few. So he did lots and lots of campaign rallies towards before the election, and the rallies got longer and longer because he had more and more false things to say, and he just kept building on it. There would be you could see the pattern. He'd have to go through his grievances about the Mueller investigation, then his grievances about the Ukraine impeachment, then his grievances about the coronavirus and falsely claiming everything was fine. The bottomless Pinocchio emerged out of the conundrum we faced because we generally do not like to use the word lie. I mean, lie means that you're getting in someone's head and you're saying that they actually believe what they know what they're saying is false. The problem with Trump is he lives in his own alternative reality. And so he convinces himself that his falsehoods are the truth. In order to qualify for a bottomless Pinocchio, it needs to be repeated at least 20 times.
You have to see these trade deals.
We were losing a fortune.
Hundreds of billions of dollars.
We lost $500 billion.
300, 400, 500 billion dollars a year. Billion!
The biggest tax cut, biggest reform of all time.
It's the biggest reduction in taxes in the history of this country.
It's the biggest tax cut in American history. This is the largest tax cut in the history of our country.
If you look at the bottomless Pinocchio list, it gives you a pretty good guide to the types of falsehoods that the president would say. A good portion, about 25%, are Trump falsely claiming accomplishments that he did not make or exaggerating about his accomplishment. Nearly 500 times he said he created the best economy in U.S. history.
We also built the greatest economy in the history of the world.
We have the greatest economy ever in the history of the world.
We have the greatest economy in
the history of the world.
No country had anywhere near us.
We had the best economy anywhere in the world.
The rally on the Mall, January 6th, I counted 107 false or misleading claims.
All of us here today do not want to see our election victory stolen by emboldened radical left Democrats, which is what they're doing, and stolen by the fake news media. That's what they've done and what they're doing.
One question people often ask, was President Trump a successful liar? I've always said that the proof would be whether or not he won re-election, because if he won re-election, that would indicate that someone who constantly misled the American people would actually successfully hoodwink enough that he could continue as president. So he didn't win re-election, but he has managed to convince a sizable portion that this utterly absurd statement that he lost the election because of fraud is true. And it's going to take a lot of work to make sure that people understand that it wasn't true. The long-term lessons of Trump, if that kind of misbelief continues to persist, it says that it might indicate that a more skilled wannabe despot could actually succeed where Trump failed.
4 different hacks that you could implement today to get more followers on Instagram without posting more. In fact, this creator right here just used these tips to gain over 50,000 followers in just 2 months.
And that was a horrific event, worthy of much denunciation. It was interesting how he began with unity and then ended in unity. That was the part they rewrote clearly. But right in the middle, it
was all that middle part, right?
They were planning on telling no matter what. And that was just absolutely filled with lies. Some of these are sort of funny lies. So like he said with faith about something, he was saying no evidence he's ever been faithful. The Democratic Party is weaponizing the justice system.
In that spirit, the Democrat Party should immediately stop weaponizing the justice system.
No evidence of that, as shown by Bob Menendez, now being convicted felon himself. He called them partisan witch hunts. That's obviously not accurate. Trump said he's saving democracy. Few people in American history have gone after democracy the way that Trump has. He said he has an amazing wife, Melania. No evidence Trump thinks his wife is amazing based on their interactions, as we just observed.
And certainly plenty of evidence that she doesn't find him amazing.
Maybe that way is more clear. He said we beat them on impeachment. He's been impeached twice. Maybe he means convictions. Okay. He said we beat them on indictments. He was convicted. I don't know how that's beating them on indictments. We did a great job with COVID.
We were right there in the first term. We got hit with COVID. We did a great job. Nobody knew what it was.
The mishandling of Trump on COVID is at least focusing on one metric shown by the hundreds of thousands of deaths that could have been prevented, according to medical professionals, if we had a better handling that was taken more serious.
Yeah, on that note, just to add to that, Dr. Deborah Birx, his own medical advisor, said that everything after the first 100,000 deaths, in her professional opinion, could have been prevented had Trump and the Trump administration taken the virus more seriously.
He said that he rebuilt the military. I'm curious by what metrics he means that, because we saw massive increases in investments in the military under Obama. Return law and order to the streets.
We will return law and order to our streets, patriotism to our schools, and importantly, we will restore peace.
If by law and order he means trying to prevent crime and hold people accountable for crime, obviously crime rates have been plummeting under President Joe Biden, now lower than they were under Trump. He said we're a nation in decline. Again, I don't know why.
Can we take a look at that just a second here? So Steve Ratner has been fact checking him as well. Trump's violent crime rates were actually higher than President Biden's. 2024 is on track for a 26% decrease in crime relative to Trump's last term.
He said a bunch of stuff about the quote unquote illegal immigration crisis. His rhetoric, obviously, on that is vile. But we should note, if we're talking about wanting to solve problems at the border, as Josiah mentioned earlier, Trump has called for Republicans to essentially shoot down all solutions, even very conservative ones, to hurt Biden politically. He said, we will drill, baby, drill. I don't know how we drill more than we currently are, because right now we're breaking records, much more oil production in the United States than we saw even under Trump, hitting record highs for this country and for every country in the history of humanity. He said we'll start paying off debt.
Can you believe what they're doing? But by doing that, we will lead a large-scale decline in prices. Prices will start to come down. Energy raised it. They took our energy policies and destroyed them. Then they immediately went back to them, but by that time, so much was lost. But we will do it at levels that nobody's ever seen before, and we'll end lots of different things. We'll start paying off debt and start lowering taxes even further. We gave you the largest tax cut.
That's what he said going into his last term, and he added more to the debt than any president in American history. He said inflation is still high, I guess, and had a bunch of inflation talking points. Just as a reminder, inflation is now down close to that healthy economic figure where you want to have it, and wages are growing faster.
To the extent that the Federal Reserve is actually now contemplating interest rate cuts for the first time in years. Also on that score, just with respect to debt, again, Steve Ratner's pointed this out, Trump added twice as much debt than President Biden in a similar 4-year term. And Trump promised that he would not only not add to the debt, but he would wipe out all the debt he'd inherited from previous presidents, from Obama all the way to President Washington.
He blamed the invasion of Ukraine on President Biden. There is no evidence that makes any sense. And actually, if you had to pick one person that has been the most strong and influential in the defense of Ukraine, thus discouraging of Russia and invading Ukraine further, it has been President Biden. He said that, I told you before, Josiah, that he said this thing about Iran. We were about to make a deal. We were going to have everything figured out with Iran. He made that.
I mean, Trump made so many lies in his speech. The people listening, since you can't stop his speech and while he's making it, you can't actually, refer to, yeah, this was the lie. It actually takes a minute. And when people are listening to the lies, he says so many just naturally. He says these lies naturally. That's literally why they call him a narcissist, right? One of the main reasons why he's called a narcissist is because he flips lies out constantly, regularly. He won't show you much body or physical language that he's lying, even though you can see right through him. He does a horrible job at lying, but you're used to it now. So he's used to it, even more of lying in front of people. I mean, who could lie that well if they weren't used to it, if they hadn't worked on it already? He doesn't care. He doesn't blink when he's telling a lie, although he looks horrible. But agencies, news agencies and media, of course, social media, YouTubers and things like that, but also major media have been covering the amount of lies he's made in just this last speech alone, but also the entire time he was president. So let's hear some more.
That claim again.
Including the horrible war with Russia and Ukraine, which would have never happened if I was president. And the war caused by the attack on Israel, which would have never happened if I was president. Iran was broke. Iran had no money. Now Iran has $250 billion. They made it all over the last 2.5 years.
Can we talk about the Iran thing too? Because again, there was so much there that I was trying to keep track of as well. So the situation with Iran is very important. He complained about how close they are to developing a nuclear weapon. That happened specifically and exclusively because of Donald Trump, because Donald Trump revoked the joint, the JCPOA, basically the Iran nuclear deal. We were paying them, and it was working to not build nuclear weapons. Right. The United Nations and European allies and the United States were able to go in and actually inspect this. We did it multiple times. It was working as a deterrent. But Trump and the Republicans withdrew the deal, and now they're closer than ever to developing a nuclear weapon. The only reason that's the case is because Donald Trump shredded the deal.
Anybody can actually go and Google that and find out that what they're saying right here about Trump is true. Anyone could Google that. The nuclear situation with Iran is very clear. I mean, maybe a lot of young people don't follow the media news, but they should, because when that happened, it was under Trump's order. Trump is the one who stopped the inspections on Iran. Before that, the United Nations and others were able to walk right up in there and inspect to see that Iran wasn't developing. Maybe they assisted them or made some sort of payments to be able to inspect them. But when they stopped the inspections because of Trump's order, they're closer now than ever. And guess what happened? Also, they began to be hostile in the region again, hence Hamas and things like that. But Trump writes a complete different timeline. It's crazy, but you should Google it and ask yourself, does it fit?
Exactly right. He said that they used COVID to cheat. One of the most outrageous lies that he told. He said Biden was the worst president in American history. You can make, even with Biden's recent struggles and public perception problems and questions of competency, all that stuff, you can make a very compelling case that Biden's been one of the most effective presidents in modern American history. Trump
on that score, hang on. Also on that score, there again, Luke, you have the organization of American presidential scholars that get together routinely and carefully, forensically evaluate the presidencies, again, going from Washington all the way to Biden. And Donald Trump is ranked dead last, according to experts, people who understand presidencies infinitely better than anyone at the RNC. because based on policy alone, Trump was objectively terrible, and also a failure with respect to his own agenda. President Biden has accomplished considerably more of his agenda than Trump did of his. And the bipartisan infrastructure law is just a beautiful apples to apples comparison. Trump promised to deliver infrastructure, sweeping infrastructure for 4 years, folks. Biden got it done in less than one. So we're not talking about two different policies. We're talking about one policy that both.
Now, there's probably a lot of people that are thinking, or some people, that are thinking, okay, if Biden did this and Biden did that, if he issued sweeping infrastructure a deal for trillions of dollars, right? For $1 trillion, then where's it at? Where's it at? Because you want it to be there right this second. And in a lot of ways, that's somewhat how the vote can break up too. Like many people, they go for like immediate assistance, you could say. And even myself, I think you have to have different tools. You got to have immediate and you got to have long term. But in this case with the parties, you will see some immediate and some long term. But Biden, in a lot of ways, gets hit, or his the platform that the Dems run on, it gets hit by making infrastructure. When it makes infrastructure, these are long-term things that secure the future interest, right? Also some in the immediate, but most, I would say, long-term, to stabilize issues, to stabilize the economy, to stabilize the workforce, to stabilize jobs, right? So that it can last, these periods of growth can last at a longer, more sustained period for the average working class person. But they're not instantly immediate. So in some way, Biden always gets hit back for that. So you could, in other words, give a few checks and pennies here and there, and then also at the same time, try to ask people to accept worse wages, worse working conditions, worse security, worse infrastructure, because they got the immediate handout, but they didn't want anything else. They didn't follow the story with any other type of investment.
Men tried to tackle, and Trump failed in 4 years. Biden got it done less than one. Biden is infinitely more competent than Trump. That's simply objective truth. Continue.
Absolutely. Trump built the greatest economy in the history of the world. I don't even want to send us into that rant, Josiah. But obviously, if you're making the case for the economic metrics that Trump oversaw, you have to give most of the credit to the recovery we saw under Obama, and then also take note of the very metrics that he would be celebrating were the ones that we saw slowed progress from the economic projections that were being made as Obama left office. He said,
on that note, real GDP growth, which is the single most important macroeconomic metric, it was higher under President Biden than Donald Trump. Their employment, there are more people, there are more jobs than there are workers at the moment to fill those jobs. Employment is higher now than it was pre-pandemic. We have 6.5 million more jobs compared to pre-pandemic levels. So yes, everything Luke is saying is absolutely true.
And just so you know, I don't know if you're making a gesture at me or anything. Right now I have this doc pulled up, so I wouldn't be able to see, so you can just keep jumping in. I'm loving it.
Oh, no. Sorry. No. I'm gesturing because I talk with my hands, unfortunately.
Oh, no, all good. I was just telling you guys why I haven't paused naturally. He said the world was at peace while he was president.
I was the first president in modern times to start no new wars. Our opponents inherited a world at peace and turned it into a planet of war. We're in a planet of war.
False. Yemen, Syria, even eastern Ukraine, talking about the invasion of Ukraine. If you look at sort of the thread to follow as we got to the full-scale invasion, you saw Russian-backed separatists causing ruckus and deaths there. Afghanistan, he promised to get out. Obviously, just like with all the things I mentioned before, it was going to happen. Right after he left office, there was still ongoing conflict between Israel Palestine.
51 active armed conflicts going on at the world in 2020, as is the case in 2021. So when he left office, it was the same number of conflicts than when he was in office. So there was virtually no change.
I didn't know that stat.
Yeah.
And just as a few other examples, way more innocent civilian casualties from drone strikes. deaths there. Afghanistan, he promised to get out, obviously.
Wait a
just
second.
like with
Hold on. Let me hear this again.
thread to follow as we got to the full-scale invasion. You saw Russian-backed separatists causing ruckus and deaths there. Afghanistan, he promised to get out, obviously, just like with all the things I mentioned before. It was going to happen. Right after he left office, there was still ongoing conflict between Israel, Palestine.
51 active armed conflicts going on at the world in 2020, as is the case in 2021. So when he left office, it was the same number of conflicts than when he was in office. So there was virtually no change.
I didn't know that stat.
Yeah.
And just as a few other examples, way more innocent civilian casualties from drone strikes than Obama and Biden, and they made that process less transparent. Biden has brought those down significantly. More U.S. troops died, as Josiah mentioned earlier, under him than Biden.
Yeah, well, can we talk about that? Because Afghanistan's kind of this whole thing. I just want to rattle a couple of things off. Yes.
They're just talking about the lies that Trump told in his RNC speech. That's it. That's crazy. There's so many lies.
There were 13 U.S. service people who died under President Biden when ISIS-K attacked the Kabul airport as we were leaving Afghanistan. That was a tragedy. But 45 soldiers died under Donald Trump during his presidency. So if that grim statistic, soldiers' casualties, if that is the metric by which we evaluate presidents, more U.S. troops died under Donald Trump than Joe Biden. Also, with respect to Afghanistan, Donald Trump says $80 billion worth of equipment. It's not true. $20 billion worth of equipment was given to Afghanistan or sold to Afghanistan across the 20-year term under Bush, under Obama, under Trump, and under Biden. And by the way, the DOD did audits even during the Trump administration to try to track this equipment. They failed those audits, which means that Donald Trump allowed U.S. sold or loaned equipment to the Taliban to not be properly tracked. And once again, per usual, just left everything for Biden to clean up. And I also point out with respect to Afghanistan, Donald Trump released 5,000 imprisoned Taliban fighters, 5,000, and then left half that number in terms of U.S. troops. So he gave the Taliban back twice as many troops as he left for President Biden in Afghanistan. He did not hold the Taliban to any of their stipulations, any of the terms they were supposed to meet. There were 7 conditions. The only condition that the Taliban honored was to not shoot U.S. troops. Donald Trump did not enforce the other 6 conditions, but again, continued to retrograde U.S. forces. So it's simply objectively a fact that Donald Trump set the stage for an impossible withdrawal from Afghanistan in terms of smoothness. So something else to remember.
And one of the reasons I've stated before, with the tragedy that it was in our exit of Afghanistan, one of the reasons presidents before Biden didn't get it done like Trump after promising to, is because you're going to be informed on, and it was more disastrous than probably Biden thought it was going to be, but you're going to be informed on the logistical, potentially humanitarian nightmare that this is. But unless you think we should have stayed in Afghanistan forever, then Biden did what was a very difficult thing that other presidents couldn't because of the knowledge that it could turn out to be so disastrous. Trump said that we experienced the worst inflation ever in the United States under Biden. That's just not true. And we've talked about before, if you look at the spending and the supply chain problems and all these things that were happening under Trump leading into Biden, just like we saw in countries around the world post-pandemic, we were going to have inflation. And I think the rapid decrease in those rates is something that you could credit not just to Biden, but to some of these efforts across different entities and individuals. Americans, you mentioned earlier, Biden, Josiah, the high employment numbers under Biden. I'm getting sleepy too. And Trump said that Americans are being squeezed out of the labor force by undocumented. Reality, we're seeing so much, I think, record high and near full employment. So that just could not be more.
Yeah,
false.
Our labor force participation for prime workers is high under Biden than it ever was under Donald Trump. It's the highest it's been since President Bush. And again, we have more job openings than people to fill them. That's how good our employment situation is. Like we have, I think it's still near 4% unemployment rate. And again, even if you control for COVID with respect to employment, this is huge, folks. Biden still has a better jobs record than Trump.
Yep.
Joe Biden, if you break it down by monthly averages, it's 162,000 jobs created per month under Donald Trump controlling for COVID, and 280,000 jobs per month created under President Biden also controlling for COVID. Biden is the winner.
He said, and this one really just broke my brain, 107% of jobs have been taken by undocumented immigrants.
Today, our cities are flooded with illegal aliens. Americans are being squeezed out of the labor force and their jobs are taken. By the way, you know who's taking the jobs that are created? 107% of those jobs are taken by illegal aliens. And you know who's being hurt the most by millions of people pouring into our country? The black population and the Hispanic population.
Right.
How does that make sense?
Well, math works differently for Republicans, okay? 170, you got to adjust for inflation, right? So 107% is 100% in Democrat math.
He said he has, with great humility, he said some sentence. I just marked that down because he has no humility. He said that Biden wants to raise your taxes for X. Biden has promised and stuck to not raising the taxes of anyone making less than $400,000 per year. And even for those making more than that, he's not going to 4X people's taxes. And it's funny to make these claims. Biden had the House and the Senate, and he was the president, and he didn't do these things. Trump also predicted the stock market was going to crash under Biden. It's hitting record the highs. So it's just absurd that people could hear such a prediction, do the math in their head, multiplying the top marginal tax rate by 4. What is that really going to happen? Probably not. And definitely not for those making less than $400,000 per year. Biden's spending is fueling the inflation crisis. Inflation has been plummeting, as we talked about earlier. And if we're talking about spending, if we are blaming, even though there's more factors than just this, inflation on the spending, Trump was doing
Trump
even
spent more.
of
Trump
that.
just spent twice as much as Biden did. Trump, by the way, deficit spent all 4 years in office. This idea that he only did ludicrous, extraordinary, extravagant, profligate spending because of COVID is simply not true. He deficit spent in year 1, year 2, year 3, and yes, year 4 during COVID.
Yep. Way. Even if you take away the response to COVID spending, way more than Biden. And what was he adding to the deficit and thus debt in the interest of?
Well, a $2 trillion tax cut for the rich, Luke. I mean, come on. Why wouldn't you? I mean, what are your spending priorities? Here's the thing. Let's just say this. It's really reductive to compare, U.S. macro economics and macro spending compared to like a personal household. I know people like to compare it to your credit card. But if we really wanted to get crude, right, you got to compare what Republicans and Democrats swipe the credit card for. Republicans, and particularly Donald Trump, use the American credit card, again, in this very crude metaphor, of the equivalent of like a new flat screen TV for somebody who already has a flat screen TV. Whereas President Biden and everyone are using it, Democrats are using America's credit card for the equivalent of groceries, right? Just the spending priorities and what Biden has gotten done with the spending. And my God, just real quick, one metric which jumped out a lot because of the Inflation Reduction Act, the CHIPS and Science Act, and the bipartisan infrastructure law, manufacturing construction has skyrocketed under President Biden, especially when you control, when you factor for inflation as well. So again, Biden has spent half as much as Trump and has gotten considerably more out of the deal.
He floated potentially putting a tariff of 100 to 200% on any foreign cars, which, if you're trying to get inflation down, that plus the 10% tariff across the board that he's interested in, you're doing the exact wrong thing. He did talk about the Green New scam, referring to the Green New Deal, having all these impacts on this, that, and the other thing, which makes no sense given that it hasn't been passed or signed into law. And Biden's green energy policies are
Day on Easter Sunday.
Bottom line to every single thing that's going on in this great country today is one thing. We become totally unhinged if Donald Trump is not elected in November.
There was a lot of stuff you can't really try to fact check. There were personal stories, general praise of Trump, broad denunciations of Biden, subjective accusations that Biden was personally responsible for drug overdose deaths, which I think we should note rolls under President Trump as well. But there was also some significant inaccuracy we can check. Arizona U.S. Senate candidate Carrie Lake made a wildly false claim that her Democratic opponent, Ruben Gallego, voted to allow illegal immigrants to vote in this election. That's a brazen distortion of a recent House vote on voter registration. Nonetheless, Republicans, including former President Trump, keep pushing this notion that Biden has crushed U.S. oil and gas production. Trump sometimes says Biden has ended it entirely, and all this stuff is not close to true.
I mean, come on. What did you think would happen? You gather this many Republicans under one roof and expect nothing but the truth? I mean, you get a better chance of keeping Donnie awake for the rest of the convention. The RNC has been everything one would come to expect from the MAGA contingent. Fear-mongering, vitriol, and T-list celebrities, I mean, that's still pretty kind. Getting on stage to call out corruption. And narrators note, by the way, the parents of the person speaking here are serving time for tax fraud.
We need to rise above the persecution. We need to hold rogue prosecutors accountable. There should be no immunity. We need to expose the Democrats' corruption, and better yet, the Biden.
There should be no immunity, but yet she's standing there on the stage capping for somebody that got immunity by the Supreme Court. That's crazy.
Family's corruption. And guess what? I know just the man for that job. Donald J. Trump has only one conviction that matters, and that is his conviction to make America great again. Thank you, and God bless America.
But who needs pesky details when one can blame Biden for them not abiding by Trump's tax code? Anyway, with bigger lies comes bigger responsibility, as CNN's Daniel Dale kicked off his daily fact check segment with a 4-minute stinger, calling out the plethora of misinformation spread at the convention.
Yeah, Anderson, there was a lot of stuff you can't really try to fact check. There were personal stories, general praise of Trump, broad denunciations of Biden, subjective accusations that Biden was personally responsible for drug overdose deaths, which I think we should note rolls under President Trump as well. But there was also some significant inaccuracy we can check. Arizona U.S. Senate candidate Carrie Lake made a wildly false claim that her Democratic opponent, Ruben Gallego, voted to allow illegal immigrants to vote in this election. That's a brazen distortion of a recent House vote on voter registration requirements. Senator Ted Cruz of Texas claimed with no evidence at all that Democrats deliberately let in illegal immigrants to somehow get their votes. Non-citizens cannot legally vote, and the data shows almost never do. And I thought it was notable that some of the most significant false or misleading claims tonight came from members of the House Republican leadership. Listen to what GOP Conference Chair Elise Stefanik and House Speaker Mike Johnson said about violent crime.
Biden's violent crime crisis, fueled by Democrats' pro-criminal sanctuary cities and defund the police policy.
This the thing, actually, seems like a racial element to this, or racial discrimination element to this, because when they say Biden, crime, rage, running free, crime everywhere, Biden, what they really mean is like, minorities, African Americans maybe, and Hispanics, but they say Biden instead.
Policies like we have seen in
came from member Speaker
crisis
and said about violent crime.
Biden's violent crime crisis, fueled by Democrats' pro-criminal sanctuary cities and defund the police policies like we have seen in my home state of New York.
We can't survive the dramatic increases in violence, crime, and drugs that the Democrats' policies have brought upon our community.
Now, check this out. You see that, right? Now, they're talking about violent crime. But when it comes to this particular type of violent crime, they don't do anything about. They don't want to have any conversation about it, and so you see how it becomes racist. You see, it's like two different extremes. On one hand, you're talking about violent crime with guns, and then your own presidential candidate gets nearly killed, murdered by a gun, you have to start asking a question like, why isn't it all bad? Why is only some of it bad, worth legislation, and then others, they take a defensive posture on, there's a defensive posture on how you own this gun, how you're allowed to carry this gun, right? Versus the inner cities where, actually with this gun, you don't even need a license outside of the inner cities. But in the inner cities, the gun laws are the exact opposite. The exact opposite. That's very ironic. And then they focus in on that, right? So, just worth taking a note of as you listen to this.
Community.
I'll do it again. This claim that there have been dramatic increases in violence and crime under Biden is false. In fact, both violent crime and property crime have fallen under President Biden, and there have been big declines over the last year and a half. Preliminary figures from the FBI show that violent crime is down roughly 6% in 2023, and then it dropped by a staggering 15% in the first quarter of 2024. The declines in murder in particular were even bigger. And so now, key fact here, murder in particular and violent crime in general are both below where they were in 2020, Trump's last year in office. Now, Congresswoman Stefanik's claim of a Biden violent crime crisis is subjective, I guess, but she certainly did not note that Trump had a violent crime crisis when he had worse numbers. I'm going to cough. Now, I'll caution again, this is preliminary data. A big chunk of local communities haven't submitted their numbers yet, so the precise extent of the decline in violent crime is to be determined, but it's clearly falling and not rising. And I also want to address, Anderson, a claim from House Majority Leader Steve Scalise on the Biden administration's record on U.S. energy production. Take a listen.
Let's talk energy. They've eroded the American energy dominance that President Trump delivered. We will end the Democrats' assault on American energy once and for all.
This claim about a Biden-era Democratic assault on American energy is misleading at very best. While it's true that Biden is pushing for a transition to renewables, the U.S. under Biden is producing more crude oil than any country ever has. It is a fact. The U.S. is setting fossil fuel world records under this administration. The U.S. produced a global record 12.9 million barrels of crude oil per day in 2023, easily beating the Trump-era high of about 12.3 million barrels. And Scalise also spoke of U.S. energy exports under Biden. Well, U.S. crude exports in 2023 were also the highest on record for anybody. Now, we should be clear here not to suggest these records are being set because of President Biden, who certainly has taken a bunch of steps the fossil fuel industry, oil companies don't like. These are market-driven increases, a lot of them caused by improvements in fracking, horizontal drilling technology. But nonetheless, Republicans, including former President Trump, keep pushing this notion that Biden has crushed U.S. oil and gas production. Trump sometimes says Biden has ended it entirely, and all this stuff is not close to true. Anderson?
Ooh, that's a bingo. I used to tune in to every speech at the RNC. It's a tough watch. But I will tell you that there's a through line dedicated to demonizing immigrants, painting them with the broadest of brushes, everything from criminals to rapists, and the need for mass deportation. And this is from the same people clutching their pearls as they tried to blame Democratic rhetoric for last week's assassination attempt. The same people coddling those who chanted "Hang Mike Pence" while storming the Capitol are now up in arms about political rhetoric.
But nobody who's being an honest broker can possibly believe that the Democratic rhetoric is the problem here. So if the issue is that we're saying all the time that he's like Hitler and he's a threat to democracy, and by the way, J.D. Vance has also said that he's like Hitler, and I guess he's redeemed now. But Donald Trump sent a fundraising email just last week that said Joe Biden is a threat to democracy. And only one of these candidates has inspired people who sent pipe bombs to leading Democrats across the country, who has inspired mass shooters. Talk about firing up the base. Donald Trump has been doing that since 2016. Remember when he said the Second Amendment people could take care of it? When he was talking about Hillary Clinton abolishing the Second Amendment and she'll get to appoint judges. He talked about, remember that congressman from Montana who body slammed a reporter and he said, he's my type. He re-truthed or whatever it was, a video of Joe Biden hogtied Just back in my...
That was hilarious.
Yeah. Oh, that's
Your examples
hilarious.
are so tiny.
No, they're
We're
not.
talking about an attempted assassination that left a man dead. A shooter groomed and incentivized by a drumbeat of demonization.
You have no idea what
can
that
call people.
registered Republican
You can call people.
Donald Trump ran for office in 2016 telling protesters rallies to punch people who pay their bills. As president, he played a clip of a guy saying the only good Democrat is a dead Democrat. He said to the Proud Boys, stand back and stand by. He called Nazis at Charlottesville. No, let me finish. You're interrupting me, Piers. I need to finish my sentence. You get to finish yours. I'm on your show. I'm a guest. I'm answering. Let me get to. I'm pointing out there's not two sides. What Donald Trump has said. Your viewers need to hear this because you're not telling them this. Trump spent his entire presidency inciting violence against Ilhan Omar, George Soros, multiple members of Congress, people of color. Right? He left office. Right, having incited an insurrection which you condemned. He told them to go fight like hell. He said Mark Milley should be executed, the chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff.
What's this got to do with my question?
He mocked Paul Pelosi. I'm getting to it. He mocked Paul Pelosi for being hammered in the head.
He was wrong to do that. That was outrageous. To be
executed. It's not about whether he was wrong, Piers. I can give you dozens of actual violent quotes from Donald Trump, Marjorie Taylor Greene, Paul Gosar. You can't give me those quotes.
Can you get back to my
from
question?
Biden, Pelosi, Jeffries. No, answer my question. Where did Joe Biden say
I've asked you a question,
Republican?
Mehdi.
But it's not both sides, Piers. You can't deflect, Piers. The viewers are watching.
Your side has literally spent 8 years calling him Hitler. It's ridiculous to say that both sides.
We've already discussed the Hitler point. Where have they incited violence? Where did Biden say go kill people?
And this is their unifying message, but most people paying attention know that the Republican Party are never going to unify the country. Their entire agenda is based around fear-mongering. They need division in order to thrive. And by the way, since so much of their time on day 2 was spent on soaring crime, I think it's also important to note that recent FBI statistics show a historic drop in violent crime under President Biden. That's right, crime has plummeted under Biden after spiking under Trump.
Look at what has happened with the homicide rate. In 2020, when Donald Trump was president, he ushered in, under his presidency, the largest ever one-year jump, spiking 30%. By 2023, the homicide rate had tumbled 19% to 5.3 homicides per 100,000 people. New data from the FBI shows the rate continues to drop off dramatically, down another 26% in the first quarter of 2024, from the same time period last.
But again, who needs facts when one can fearmonger in between profound speeches from rapper Amber Rose?
Love this video? Make sure you stay up to date on the latest breaking news and all things Midas by signing up to the Midas Touch newsletter at MidasTouch.com/newsletter.